Hello and welcome to Political Frenemies, the podcast where a Conservative and a Liberal Democrat, and this week a very special guest, talk politics but still remain friends. I'm Chris Newton. I'm an academic and a former Tory defence advisor. That person to the other side of me, to the far right, if you're watching, is my co-host, Mathew Hulbert, a Lib Dem activist and former councillor. Hello, Mathew. How are you doing?
Hello, Chris. I'm good. I must admit, I'm having a new burst of energy now, but I am a wee bit tired because I've been travelling all day back from my weekend away. But like you, I'm sure, Chris, I'm very excited for our special guest today.
Yeah, no, I'm really excited as well to talk to our guest today as well. And let's get into who the guest is, shall we? Our guest is a presenter on Talk. He does the Friday drive time show and the weekend 10 to 1 in the morning show. And he's also an occasional Times radio presenter. He was a former government special advisor in 4 government departments, including the Home Office and the Ministry of Justice. He's an author. He's written The Secret Life of Special Advisors, and he's going to have another book published soon as well. And he's also a former broadcast journalist for 10 years prior to his experience as a special advisor. It is Peter Cardwell. Hello, Peter.
We need like some kind of real big applause thing there, don't we? For when
it's fine. Honestly, it's fine. Thank you both very much for having me on the podcast. I really appreciate it. It's great. I know Mathew very well, Chris. Obviously, we'll get to know each other over the next little while. But thank you for having me on.
Fabulous. Well, this is very exciting, isn't it, Chris? Sorry, I interrupted. This is what sometimes happens, you see. I just butt in.
Really? You? Really? Okay. It's a new experience.
So I've heard you've had quite the week this week, Peter.
Yes, on Thursday, I interviewed the Prime Minister. I've been trying for about 4 months to get the Prime Minister on Talk. He hasn't done it. I've interviewed him a couple of times before, not since he became Prime Minister. And he, of course, we hear from Keir Starmer a lot, but it wasn't a sort of talk presenter who I was actually interviewing him. So I went up to Staffordshire this week and interviewed the Prime Minister, and he was good enough to give me about 7.5 minutes. He also actually did another interview, which hasn't been published yet, which is for my book, which is coming out in September. It's called Political Animals, and I was asking him about all sorts of things. So it's not every day in a kitchen of someone who was a case study for the policy they were announcing. You get to talk about Larry the cat and bombing Iran.
Well, quite. Now, I just want to interject myself here again, Peter, because a couple of things. And I think this one, I'm just going to point out to listeners and viewers, but I think we can just about forgive you for it, is that actually we were going to be doing this podcast on Thursday morning. And I got a bit of a cryptic thing from Peter saying, really, really sorry, Mathew, you can't do it. Got to go and interview someone.
A work thing has come up, which in a court of law is factually accurate, but I wasn't perhaps giving you the full details there. I couldn't really. And actually, to be honest, it was less about not being sort of fully truthful. It was much more about nervousness because this had been promised on a number of occasions. It hadn't quite happened. And until we had the footage in the can, as it were, I mean, it's all digital now, but until it was actually recorded, I didn't tell anybody about it apart from there were people in Talk who didn't know about it. A lot of people in Talk who didn't know about it. And it was really kept very, very close. So thankfully, the Prime Minister delivered. He did what he said he would do and what his advisors said he would do, and we got the interview.
Indeed, you did. Now, before we get on to why, I mean, obviously that was significant in of itself, but I just want to very quickly relay a story that I have a bit of a similar experience, albeit going back a very long time. So you know, Peter, that I used to work in local radio journalism. And I remember back when I was at what was Centre FM in Tamworth, getting a really strange call one day saying it's blah, blah from like number 10 Downing Street, communications office. And if I was to tell you that the Prime Minister is going to be in your area tomorrow, He may or may not be, but if he is, do you want to do an interview? And I remember saying, yes, please. And then it was all this kind of coded stuff,
Yeah.
and I appreciate all of the security. Is it kind of similar today? Is it all kind of coded and a bit, yeah?
Well, in fairness, I was told with a bit less than 24 hours notice. I mean, originally I was told I was told for sure on Tuesday that it would be on Thursday. Then I was told East Midlands, which of course is a large area. Then it was at about 5 o'clock on the day before that I said to Number 10, like, we've got to book our train tickets here. We need to know timings and what time we need to go, and I need to get back because I was actually presenting the drive program at 4 o'clock, and I mean, I literally made it into the office with 9 minutes to go, which is a lot less time than I would usually like. And I usually, if I'm not presenting something else, I usually be in the office about sort of an hour and a half beforehand for the drive programs, and at least sort of half an hour, 45 minutes before in other programs, because you prepare all the time, you're doing stuff all the time, but you need to be in the office, you need to talk to the producer, all the rest of it. So yes, the security stuff is still there. It is very important, and even actually when I was a special advisor, when I was working with the Home Secretary and the Northern Ireland Secretary, they're both, as is publicly known, I'm not giving any secrets away, they're protected by the very good, mostly men, but sometimes women, of the Royalty and Specialist Protection branch of the Metropolitan Police. And yeah, we it was an interesting thing for me as a press spokesman, because you were in a position where you couldn't really discuss their movements or their travel. And journalists would ring me, one in particular would ring me every Sunday and say, in Northern Ireland, is the Secretary of State in Northern Ireland tomorrow? And usually he was, almost every Monday we would go over on Mondays and Thursdays usually. And I had to say, well, I can't really tell you. For background guidance, yes, but I mean, officially, no. Officially, I can't tell you. So it's that sort of thing. And unfortunately, there is a risk to their lives, and you need to be very sensitive to that.
If I can just, Chris, sorry, if I could just ask one more question, then I'll be quiet for a minute. I promise. So then you had this weird. So you did this interview, and I watched it when it went out that evening at 5 p.m. And what I really liked about it was that, let's just be honest here. Talk obviously has a certain political position. It has most of its presenters have a political viewpoint, and that is really why your viewers and listeners tune in, or indeed all of them. But actually, you held the Prime Minister to account. But you weren't like shouting over him. You were giving him time to answer, which I think is important. And so I thought it was a firm but fair interview. But then tell us about what happened afterwards and what I've certainly crowned kitchengate. I mean, this has been weird, hasn't it?
Well, there've been a lot of people who, I mean, look, it doesn't matter what you do. There were people who were. Let me start with the interview, and then I'll talk about the aftermath. So the interview itself, look, first of all, you don't get that long. I was told I get 6 minutes. It ended up being 7.5. The Prime Minister is someone who likes a bit of a chat. He does. His answers are quite long, although I'm not exactly in a position to criticise given this podcast. But he's someone who does, will speak for 2.5 minutes. And if you've got 6 minutes, that's 3 questions. And after the third question, off camera, and of course they don't say it, you don't hear them speak, and you don't see them in person, but the special advisors, and I was one of them, were going, we're doing this sort of circular motion, please finish now. And all I had in front of me were 5 questions, which only I knew, and my newsletter knew we'd gone through them beforehand. And we were talking to the Prime Minister, and they were telling us after 3 questions, can you wrap this up? And I was determined to get through them. So I hope I didn't sort of take liberties, but I certainly wanted to ask all 5 of them. And you would imagine, we didn't have them on for nearly a year, and 5 questions is perfectly reasonable. So anyway, we asked the questions. That's all fine. I mean, like, reaction, you've been very generous, Mathew, and thank you. A lot of people say, you're a patsy. It was, you should have interrupted him. You should have said he was lying. You should have shouted at him. You should have picked, some people say you should have picked one issue. What about, rape gangs, as I call them, grooming gangs, as others do, and only talked about that? Well, that's fine, but I asked 2 of my 5 questions on that topic, which is a very, very important topic to our viewers and listeners at Talk. I mean, it would have been basically unthinkable on Thursday to not ask the Prime Minister about Iran, and if Trump strikes, what are you going to do, which was one of my other questions. And also, he was in Staffordshire to make an announcement specifically on specifically on Warm Homes discount on a scheme for people, and the beneficiary of that of £150 extra money was the woman who lived in the house, or who lives in the house. And that's, for me not to ask a question about that would be quite weird as well. Right. So that was basically the 5 questions. I think there was one other one on immigration, which again is a very, very big issue to our viewers and listeners. So how you construct the interview, how the interview comes across, what I could have done, and look, different presenters have different styles. I'm not going to talk about any other presenters because I think that's unfair. But what, I could have barracked him, I could have interrupted him, I could have, been very aggressive with him, as I sometimes am in my interviews. But actually what I've come to the conclusion, I've been doing this now, presenting on Talk now for about 4.5 years. And what I've come to the conclusion of is sometimes you have a big barney with people. Sometimes you are very insistent. Sometimes you're very passionate. But actually, a lot of the time, you just let people say what they want to say. And yes, you can interrupt them at various points. And there are some stations, for example, that never interrupt people, who just let politicians talk and then speak afterwards. But I did a bit of that. I didn't do loads of that. Also, at the end of the day, for my viewers and listeners, not for me personally, but for my viewers and listeners, are we going to get another interview? If I just stand there and shout at him, or ask him the same question over and over again, is he's probably going to say, don't put me in a room with him again. So that's anyway. Look, it's a difficult dance, and it's something a lot of people you interview. I had a very, very fractious interview about 2 months ago, I think, with a lawyer who is wanting to de-prescribe Hamas. And we had a really, really fractious interview for about 20 minutes. And it was very, very dramatic. And I don't think he'll ever come on with me again. And sort of that's okay with me. But I do want to be the Prime Minister again. That'll be nice.
So Kitchengate.
So, yeah, I mean, where do you start? So the interview was fine. The interview went out. We were standing in a kitchen, which, is a bit weird. But if Downing Street says you can interview the Prime Minister, but you got to go to Staffordshire and you'll be standing in a kitchen, you sort of go, okay, fine. We were in the kitchen because, would prefer to do it in Downing Street. That would be a lot easier for us logistically. But it's the Prime Minister. We'll go to Staffordshire. So 270-mile round trip. Up we went. And on that day, there were a number of other interviews, obviously other broadcasters, BBC, and there was a sort of financial management-y influence guy who was quite good, quite interesting to talk to, and local people and various other things. Anyway, other broadcasters and journalists there as well, Press Association. And the Labour Party did the government did a little sort of promotional video for their social media where Prime Minister walks along, shakes hands with this woman, Nicola, who lives in the house. She's a single mother of 3 kids. She's on universal credit. She's training to be a teaching assistant, and she will be a recipient of this benefit. Then that went out, and that's fine. And, I as someone who's been a special advisor previously, I've sometimes organised these kind of things or been involved with them. Again, also with Prime Ministers, I worked on the 2017 election where Theresa May did quite a lot of that as well, and I was involved in that from a press perspective. So I know this sort of stuff from kind of both sides, and it happens all the time. Who was Nicola? Well, Nicola is someone who was helped by the local MP, Jacob Collier, with her benefit. She'd gone to her local MP, which often happens. She got some help from him. Then they had asked her and said, well, Prime Minister's coming. He's going to announce this big policy. You're clearly a nice person who's articulate. Can we come to your house? By the way, you'll be interviewed by the media and stuff, and they'll sort of take over your house for a day. And I always feel slightly sorry for these people who say, oh yeah, that's fine. And then there's sort of literally about 15 journalists in your house and loads of people from Number 10 and the Labour Party and various people, MPs, Ed Miliband was there and so on. So it was busy. But then Twitter, in its infinite wisdom, sort of piled in, and someone decided to make the assertion, which was wholly false, that Nicola was an actress, and said that she was an actress called Abby. And to prove, I say in inverted commas, that person put a photograph of an actress called Abby, who is a blonde woman, beside Nicola, who is a blonde woman. Right. To me, they don't look anything like one another, but this took off. And so, as the adage, which is a lot older than Twitter, goes, a lie is halfway around the world before the truth gets its boots on. And I was inundated with literally thousands of messages saying, I didn't even interview her. Actually, I spoke to the woman for a very short space of time, but other broadcasters interviewed her. She's an actress. This is a setup. Other people were saying, why have there been different interviews on different days? They weren't on different days. They were all on the same day. Different outlets have done this. She's a Labour supporter. Well, I don't know if she's a Labour supporter or not. I've no idea. And we have secret.
They're even saying you're a Labour supporter.
They thought I was a Labour supporter at one stage. They said I was a patsy and a Labour supporter. At one stage, someone said, well, he's been a special advisor to 4 Labour cabinet ministers. That's also false. I've been a special advisor to 4 Conservative cabinet ministers. Right. And I was in this very strange position of being a broadcaster of an outlet that is not that sympathetic to this government. I like to think that I sometimes give them praise when they do things right, but it's rare. I am not a Labour supporter. I've never voted Labour. In fact, I've been a member of the Conservative Party, although I'm not anymore. I've worked for a Conservative government for 3.5 years. I've actively tried to prevent the Labour government in 2 elections. And there I was defending the government on Twitter with a number of posts, some of which I replied to, many of which I did not. And we were in a situation where I sort of thought part of this is about me and my reputation and my station's reputation, but similarly, this is actually about, are these politicians lying to us? Is this all set up and is this all fake? And it's certainly, it was arranged. This visit was arranged. It wasn't as if Keir Starmer ran into this woman and she went, oh yes, come in. By the way, 15 media people can come into my house. It was arranged, but it's not a setup per se. And people say, oh, this is a setup and she's an actress and all the rest of it. Factually wrong.
And just very finally from me, what about kind of Andrew Neil doing his research publicly on Twitter? So that's kind of, in my view, peddling the falsehoods, but claiming that he was asking questions.
Matthew, I disagree with that. Okay. So Andrew Neil waded into this, and that amplified it to a huge degree. He was saying, he was essentially saying, I'm seeing all this stuff on Twitter. We need some answers for this because lots of people are asking these questions. What are the answers to these questions? And I then replied to him and gave him the answers to the questions. She's not an actress. She's not a Labour Party activist that I know anyway. She's her name is Nicola. She's that is her name. She does live at the house. She is a mother of 3 children and a beneficiary of this new scheme from the government. I think that's perfectly legitimate from him. I mean, in theory, I suppose he could have rung up Number 10 and asked them those questions. But actually, we live in a different age now. I have no problem with Andrew Neil doing that. I respect him and have for many years. I don't know him personally, although we've met a few times. And as soon as I responded to those questions, he retweeted it. He said, great to get that cleared up. Thanks, Peter. That's fine. And actually, the net result of that is that my post responding to him, because he retweeted it, has been seen by about 500,000 people. Now, there will be people who will never accept what I say. They'll say I'm a liar. They'll say I'm a patsy. They'll say I'm part of a vast conspiracy. They'll say she's an actress, even though she factually isn't, etc., etc. And that's fine. But to actually have someone who has the level of respect that many people have, especially on the right, for Andrew Neil, to say, now it's cleared up, that's actually helpful. So I have no problem with that.
Yeah, as far as I could see, he was just asking questions. He wasn't asserting. He wasn't asserting the allegations or anything. So I would agree with that. Can I turn to your career as a special advisor and your book as well, which we will put a link in the description.
Thank you.
So everybody, it's called The Life of Special Advisors. I was very interested to read it. We're both former Conservative advisors, but we've had very different experiences. I was in opposition, you was in government, you're a media spad, I was a subject specialist in party headquarters, so very different experiences. Very entertaining book. I really liked it.
Thank you.
And it brought back some really good memories as well. So there's some people there that I recognise, Fiona Hill, Amy Fisher, Jonathan Kane, Sheridan Westlake, all of those people I had encountered as well during my time. I just for our viewers and listeners, if you could explain sort of what is a special advisor and how on earth does one end up as a special advisor?
So, in terms of what they are, every cabinet minister has the opportunity to, at public expense, employ usually 2 or slightly more, maybe 3 or 4. In the Prime Minister's case, it's a lot of his staff, about half his staff, about 40 of his staff, or what's called special advisors. Now, they are appointed. They are linked to either the minister or the Prime Minister. As soon as that minister or Prime Minister goes from his or her role, that special advisor's role instantly ceases. So it's a very insecure job. But you're there to give political advice. And actually, I know you work in defence. I remember one defence special advisor saying to me on one occasion, which illustrates the point very well, actually. She said to me, my job is politics, not tanks. They have a lot of people who know about tanks, and they have a lot of people who know about aeroplanes, but her job was to advise, how is this policy going to go politically, or from the media perspective, how is this going to fly within the party and within the backbenches, and also within the media and the public, and how can that enhance the Conservative, Labour, Liberal Democrat, whatever message. So the civil service is meant to be impartial, and usually, but not always is, when you're working in government. In the Home Office, for example, we have 32,000 civil servants. We had 4 special advisors. So people talk about the price and the expense of special advisors, and all paid so much money and all the rest of it. Well, in relative terms, you're not. In relative terms, there aren't very many of them. And some of them, including some of the people you've mentioned there, give me a huge opportunity. Fiona Hill, it's actually a lesson about politics in general, because in my life, and I'm not saying I'm Mother Teresa here, but in my life, I tend not to dump people. I tend not to sort of turn my back on people. But Fiona Hill was a special advisor in the Home Office, and she worked for Theresa May. And to be a special advisor, you need 2 approvals, one from your Secretary of State, in that case, Theresa May, and one from the Prime Minister, who at that point was David Cameron. She had a big row and allegedly leaked a document, and Michael Gove, a big row with him, and when he was Education Secretary, and her Downing Street approval was revoked. So she lost her job. Many people thought Fiona's career is over. We're not going to talk to her. She's not part of our gang anymore. She'll go off and do something else and not be in politics anymore. Well, by a weird series of events, Theresa May became Prime Minister and Fiona Hill became Chief of Staff. And what happened was, in that intervening period, I had sent some supportive messages to Fiona and said, I wouldn't say that we're friends per se, but we had a warm relationship and still do. And then when she became Chief of Staff again, I thought, do you know what? I'm going to send her my CV. I'll probably never hear another word about this. But I wonder if I could be a special advisor. I knew about the job because I'd worked at Newsnight. I had a 10-year career in journalism, both as a reporter and a producer in various places, Washington, New York, Belfast as well, and South Africa. I worked there for about 6 months on my gap year. And I also, at the stage that Theresa May went into Downing Street, I worked on Good Morning Britain as a reporter. And I enjoyed my life. It would be very interesting. But when I was on Newsnight particularly, I was one of the political team, one of the big guest bookers on the political team. I got to know a lot of special advisors. They're the sort of gatekeepers. They often decide, will the minister go on Newsnight or another programme? And I got to know Fiona, and a lot of people found her very difficult. I didn't. What I found was actually she was very straightforward. I could ask her at 11 o'clock in the morning, will Theresa May do Newsnight? And she would say yes or no, or we'll give you a junior minister. Whereas many special advisors who might have been perhaps seen as a bit more clubbable and maybe a bit friendlier, would keep you hanging on till 7:30 at night, and then you'd be scrambling to get a member of the select committee over to West London for 10:30. So we got on well, and then I sent off my CV, and she asked me to become special advisor in the Northern Ireland office with someone I'd never met, James Brokenshire. Had a meeting with him, and then off I went to work for him. So it's a very strange job. There's no sort of clear application process, although Dominic Cummings actually tried to put some sort of process into it. It's really right place, right time kind of stuff. At that stage, the Conservative Party and Conservative government needed someone who understood Northern Ireland politics and London politics and Northern Ireland and London media. And also there'd been an advisor, one of the people you mentioned there, Lord Kane, Jonathan Kane, for 6 years. But they felt they needed another advisor, and James Brokenshire wanted a specific media person. So I was brought onto the team to do that, and on it went.
Yeah, this may or may not surprise you, but I actually quite liked Fiona Hill.
No mucking about with her. You know where you are. If you've annoyed her, you know that.
Yeah, I mean, when during my time, she was sitting in the pod behind me, and my days was just like filled with her legendary bollockings to journalists, which was very funny from my perspective. But if you're on the other side of the
you don't want to be on the
phone,
receiving
then
end of it.
yeah. But she was always nice and pleasant to me. I mean, maybe that's because we didn't actually work together on the same brief. So, and we only really spoke to each other socially. But
I think different people have different experiences of different people. I will always be grateful to Fiona. She changed my life. She brought me into being a special advisor. I know others wouldn't say the same thing. I know she's a very controversial character, and that's fine. And in fact, I was in the Home Office working there, and one of the civil servants said to me, "How did you get into being a special advisor?" And I said, "Well, a nice woman called Fiona Hill brought me in." And Fiona, of course, had worked in the Home Office and had been there for some time as a special advisor. And the civil servant said to me, "Congratulations, you're part of the 1%. And I said, "Sorry, what do you mean part of the 1%? She said, "The 1% of people who have anything nice to say about Fiona Hill," which I thought was a really sort of pithy, amusing, but ultimately quite nasty thing to say.
Yeah. Can I ask you, Peter, just because we'll shortly be wrapping up the kind of interview part of the podcast, and we kind of talked to you for so long just in this part because there's so much to talk about. But just two quick final questions from me. First of all, you mentioned James Brokenshire there, and I really felt that your book, which I really enjoyed, was somewhat of a kind of friend's kind of love letter to him, and because obviously no longer with him with us anymore, and from all accounts a wonderful person. So I mean, what would you say about him?
Yeah, my friend who read the book said it was quite funny. My publisher said, "You've got to put something critical about James Brokenshire in this book. It can't all be he's a great guy." And I put in that he was sometimes a bit long-winded, which coming from me is pot calling kettle black. But he said,
you mentioned something about the glasses as well, that he needed to
wear the glasses. The glasses. I hated his glasses. I really hated them. I mean, it wasn't really his fault. And actually, there's one occasion when I couldn't get hold of him on the phone, and he rang me back later and said, "I'm sorry, I was at the opticians." And I said, "Oh, great, great opportunity to get rid of your geeky glasses." And he said, No, my wife, Kathy, says I'm getting exactly the same ones. And if you want to take her on, and I sort of went, no. I'll speak frankly to you, never take on the family. But you do get to know families very well. No, I mean, a friend of mine read the book and said that James Brokenshire comes out of my book better than God comes out of the Bible, which I thought was a very good line. And actually, it was, I think, Robert Colville, who's the head of the Centre for Policy Studies. He said it was a sort of love letter to James Brokenshire. I mean, look, he fraternally, he was really. I became close friends with him, and even more so actually when we didn't work together. But we worked together twice, and both at the Northern Ireland office for about 18 months, and then at the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government for a further roughly 18 months, a bit more. And it was an immense privilege to work with him because he was an incredibly kind, thoughtful, nice, diligent, intelligent, and nobody's fool. He wasn't a patsy. He wasn't a wimp. He was actually a very, very strong person, and you knew if you'd annoyed him, actually, and he didn't have to say much. In fact, I remember saying to a civil servant, often we would have people coming into private office who would be dealing with James, and I was the sort of gatekeeper. And I would bring them in and have a chat with them and say, look, you need to learn the signs. You need to know when he's really, really annoyed. And if he says this is ridiculous, if he says this is ridiculous, that's the time. That's the equivalent of, I don't know, another minister spontaneously combusting and trashing the room and throwing chairs and shouting and swearing at civil servants. Like, that's as angry as you will see him. But he is really, really angry when that has happened, and he's very, very frustrated. So, look, he is someone who gave me a lot. He taught me an awful lot. He employed me twice. He gave me a job, actually on 3 occasions, if you count a couple of reshuffles and elections. And I became close to him and his family. And I worked for 3 other people Karen Bradley, Amber Rudd, and Robert Buckland. I like all three of them, and it was maybe a bit more than a professional relationship, but largely a professional relationship. Whereas James was a mate, and I was really, really privileged when he very sadly left us he had lung cancer and became a great campaigner for lung cancer charities. When Kathy, his wife, who's still a very good friend of mine, in fact, I had my birthday a couple of weeks ago when she was there, she asked me to speak at his memorial service in St Margaret's Church in Westminster Abbey. And it was just this sort of slightly weird occasion when the Speaker of the House of Commons, the Deputy Speaker of the House of Commons, the current Prime Minister, who at that stage was Boris Johnson, the former Prime Minister, Theresa May, and me were on the billing, which is a kind of slightly weird thing. But, James was a great guy. He was a very funny man in many ways. He came across very seriously. Of course, he had to in many of the roles, especially in regards to Northern Ireland. But he was, a really great, faithful friend, and I miss him very much.
And can I just ask you, finally, in terms of the interview, Peter, that you've just thanked James there. I want to publicly thank you, because both you and Ian Dale, had this guy on your show who nobody knew from Adam. And, I think you both originally had me on to talk about what happened to my dear mum. But then I basically badgered the two of you and said, look, I can't talk about other things, and I think you both in effect said, well, okay, but you better deliver, Mathew, which I hope I have.
And you did. You're a great talker. I disagree with you on basically everything, but you're a very good, very, very, you've got a great personality. You're a great person, and you believe things really strongly. And I really enjoy interviewing you, even when I, sometimes want to hit you over the head with a book.
and do you think it's good for your viewers and listeners, actually, to not just always hear from people that they agree with?
Yes, and actually what I try to do, different presenters have different styles, different people do different things, but I always try, in as much as I can, to get Liberal Democrats, Labour people on, government, people who will provoke. And some people say, oh, I don't want to hear from that person, or, I can't believe you got this person on again, or whatever. But actually, talk viewers and listeners are intelligent people who are really interested in politics, who care an awful lot about our country and want our country to be a better place. You may, many people even watching and listening to this podcast may disagree with talk, may say that's not for me. We have some people who are really sniffy about the station. I don't think they should be. I think they should give it a go. And I'm very, very grateful to hear from people who are generally very impassioned, often quite angry about what's happening to your country. And that's a good thing, because for so long we've had so much apathy, and we've had many people saying all politicians are the same, and actually that's part of the criticism some of our viewers and listeners would have, certainly of the mainstream parties of Conservatives, Labour and Liberal Democrats, and maybe others as well. And Reform UK is a challenge to that. But it's great to have you on, and it's great to have people who say different things and challenge and provoke. And I always find that when people challenge me, well, it makes me think, well, hold on, why do I think that? Why do I have that view? I should say with Ian Dale as well, who is a great guy who helped me. I've been on his programs no longer because we're rivals. LBC and Talk are, of course, rivals. But he's had me on the shows previously. And actually, this mug, you may have noticed this Richard Nixon mug. I have many presidents, and I'm an equal opportunities one. Of a Lyndon Johnson one as well. I just love that period of history. I'm fascinated by it. This is from Ian Dale's store. So there we are.
Right. Well, can I just say that, I mean, the team at Talk, and I know at least one person, famously Peter, made the mistake of swearing or whatever to one of your producers. I always say I did some media training last week for Make Votes Matter folks, pro-proportional representation folks, and I said to them, never in any way, talk down to or have a go at or in any way insult the producers or the people behind the scenes, because number one, they're overwhelmingly lovely people, and number two, they're the gatekeepers of whether you're going to get on or not, right?
It's the same in politics. Number one rule in life is don't be a dick. I try and sometimes fail to uphold that, but yeah, I remember in politics, similarly in broadcasting, I remember in politics when people would come in, sometimes they'd worked very hard to get a meeting with my Secretary of State. They would treat the Secretary of State and fawn all over him or her and ignore me. And then you get an email inevitably a few weeks later saying, can we have a follow-up meeting? And I would say, well, now you've had your meeting. We've listened to what you've had to say, and you weren't very pleasant. So it's like when you're on a date and the person's sniffy or horrible to the waiter or demanding. You're not going to go on another date with that person.
Right.
No, definitely not. I should say I'm a big fan of the station as well. In fact,
Chris just agrees with it all the time. That's it.
Good, man.
Big fan.
Mathew.
Yeah,
I mean, big fan of the format. In fact, I used to listen to the original incarnation of talk radio in the 90s. So
I used to ring in. I promise you, I was a teenager. I would occasionally ring in. Yeah.
And I genuinely think at some point, Peter, not that I want to do your booking for you live on this podcast, but I genuinely think one time, on one Saturday morning, that it should be me and Chris. We should be the panelists.
It's a good suggestion. Yeah. I wonder if you'll mention your podcast on air.
No, it's been a busy old political week, hasn't it?
Yes, it certainly has.
Yeah, let's review the political week, shall we? Okay, right. We haven't got that much time, so what I'm going to do is because we want to talk about the US strikes that have happened overnight, so we're going to bung it all into Labour's week. So we want to talk about that and of course the substance of your interview as well. But as I mentioned, the US struck targets in Iran overnight relating to their nuclear facilities. What I would first of all like to get is firstly your opinion of what went on there, and what are the implications for the UK and for Keir Starmer in particular.
I don't know if there are actually that many implications for the UK. We were informed about it as an ally of the United States. That will have been a phone call 10 minutes before it happened saying we are bombing Iran. It is happening. Keir Starmer has put out a statement, has indeed done an interview about it. He's had a Cobra. We're recording this on Sunday, and he will have had the Cobra in the afternoon. And I mean, that's fine, and that's he's reacting as he should, and I support how he has reacted. He said that he wants to de-escalate. I'm not sure that's possible. I think we're past that stage now. I hope Iran doesn't retaliate, but I expect they will. The question is, does this turn into a wider regional conflict? I mean, some would argue there's a regional conflict anyway. Israel is being attacked and indeed is retaliating on a number of different fronts. Certainly Netanyahu would argue that this is the next logical stage. He's weakened Hamas terrorism to a huge degree. He's weakened Hezbollah to a degree. He's weakened the Houthis. And actually the state that has sponsored all of them, Iran, is now next on his list. The world is in a probably more dangerous state today than it was yesterday, but there are enough people who will say actually it's safer because Iran has been weakened. Whether these bombs themselves can actually get down to a level which is as low as the Channel Tunnel to eradicate the nuclear facilities, well, we may never know that. Actually,
yeah.
So it's a tough situation. I think it's probably the right course of action. I wish it didn't have to happen, but unfortunately, every senior political leader anyway, certainly Keir Starmer and certainly Donald Trump as well, who I'm not a massive fan of necessarily, but I think he's probably done the right thing today. They're making 51-49% judgments. They are not saying, oh, well, it's black and white and it's so clear what we should do. They may say that, but actually a lot of these judgments are very, very finely balanced. Timing, strategy, exactly what they do in execution is something that will have been thought over to a huge degree. So essentially, that's my view of it.
But what does it say about Keir Starmer, Peter, that, last week he was claiming that, there's no signs that America is going to get involved. I've spoken to Donald Trump. There's no indication that
he's sitting beside him
America is going to get involved. Indeed. And then this week kind of forced to say, oh, well, America has got involved and they've done the right thing. I mean, is it not a bit weak?
There are two aspects of this. First of all, I agree with your analysis in that it's weak. But there are two bits of it. One is the unpredictability of Trump. He doesn't exactly ring up Keir Starmer and says, what do you think I should do? Because he wouldn't be in the position that he's in now and wouldn't be the person he is today if he asks people's opinion about what he should do. He does what he wants to do when he wants to do it, and he is the democratic elected president of the United States, so he has every right to do so. Now, there will be many who will disagree with that. I mean, we had Russia saying that they'd contravened international law, which was would be kind of hilarious if it weren't so tragic. Getting lectures on international law from Vladimir Putin. Thanks. I think I'll probably not take those. Thank you. Hashtag Ukraine. And I think that also Starmer is just not that in touch with Trump. They're very different politically. The White House foreign policy is very different than it was. The special relationship, I think, is under the most pressure it's been under in a practical terms. I don't think we're going to really fall out with America. I don't think we're going to be at war with America anytime soon. But in terms of the political relationship, we're kind of nowhere. And Donald Trump has a really good way of making you feel special. And yes, I'm listening to you. And no, of course, yeah, that's very important here. And then just doing whatever he wants. And he's the president of the United States. He can do that. And that's fine to a degree. But the very thought that they're in concert, and, there were times when with Thatcher and Reagan, with Bush and Blair, where they were in concert and they were criticized for that too.
Yeah, no, I mean, I would agree with you on that analysis there. I think it was the right thing to do in terms of Trump. Do you think Starmer should have been a bit stronger? It's, in relation to supporting Israeli action and ultimately, yeah.
I think I think he's looking over his shoulder at the electoral politics of this. We've already seen supporters. I'll be careful what I say here, but certainly supporters of, I would argue, in my strongly held personal view, Islamism, who are in Parliament. And that is, I think there are 5 of them, and that is something that I think is really, really worrying. We have Wes Streeting, for example, under a lot of pressure in his constituency. That doesn't give you the right to be weak-willed. And I believe Israel is in the right. Does it do everything perfectly? No. Is Netanyahu a nice man? No. Has he made a number of mistakes? Yes. Is there a humanitarian crisis in Gaza? Yes. Should that end? Of course it should. But to the critics of Israel and Netanyahu and all of this, including Starmer, I would ask the 2 questions. One, can you tell me anything that you think Israel has done right? Because there are some people who it's Israel, they're wrong, and that's it, and that's the way it is. And the second aspect of it I would ask is, what would you do about the threat from Hamas?
So just on that, and I know you also weren't mentioning me because you know that I absolutely condemned the October the 7th attack, which was appalling, and Hamas should release all of those that it still has hostage. But equally, do I think that the Israeli government has, in many respects, behaved intolerably in much of what has happened since? Yeah, I absolutely do.
I don't think it's equal, and I don't think it's intolerable, but that's the way it is. We're never going to agree.
As ever, we disagree.
I'm not going to go into.
I don't think you can say that equally. Hamas and the Israeli government. I don't think they're equal players. One is a terrorist, murderous, organization. The other is trying to defend a sovereign nation. So.
Yeah. So in terms of the domestic politics of this, because that's what we're really about on this podcast. I mean, do you think that this is going to be a big issue in our domestic politics or not?
Weirdly, I'm not sure it is going to be huge. I think a lot of people will talk about it. I think it'll be of interest to many, many people. Of course it is. But it's almost as if we're spectating rather than participating. I don't think that the British forces, we may allow the Americans to use our bases. Diego Garcia will come in, the Chagos, that's a whole other issue. There will be various people who are unhappy about it. David Lammy could have chosen his words better this afternoon when he talked about it being regrettable that it has happened. We don't have a government that is full square behind Israel in a way that a Conservative administration would be. So there will be political controversy at home. There are people who say, we can't get involved because of, quote unquote, war crimes, etc. So it will be an issue domestically. I'm sure tomorrow, Monday, after we record this, there'll be a statement probably from the Prime Minister to the Commons, maybe the Defence Secretary as well. It will be an issue. We will continue to see a lot in the media. But in terms of actual disagreement and any real net effect on voting behaviour, on how people see politicians, although Keir Starmer may emerge from it as a statesman, and that's the way he likes being on the international stage. Some people criticise him as being, never hear Keir and all the rest of it. Nonetheless, I can't see the dial moving massively in all of this. There is a risk for Reform UK, certainly. The characterisation that has been attempted by Labour and to a lesser degree the Conservatives is to say that Nigel Farage is, a patsy of Putin. My view of that is that Farage has said, you can admire Putin's strength in the same way as we might say, I mean, probably not, but we might say Hitler was a decisive leader. You can say that without excusing anything that he did.
Chris?
Okay, right. Moving on to some more domestic policy. I mean, this has been, I think, a very poor week for Labour. You've got the grooming gangs, national inquiry U-turn. You had the resignation of a whip. You had all various kinds of issues, and of course you've had your interview with Starmer as well. What do you think of Starmer's answers to the questions that you put, and what do you think of the lines and the communication that he produces in relation to dealing with all of these difficulties?
I think he's pretty weak. It's a very strange thing, actually, to see that we have, in July last year, less than a year ago from when we're speaking right now, Starmer got 411 MPs elected. That's an astonishing achievement. I take absolutely nothing away from it. And here we are, the most recent opinion poll from Ipsos saying that he's at 25% in the polls. That's down at least 8 percentage points within the margin of error as to where he was less than a year ago. We have Reform UK at 34% in the Ipsos poll today, and that is suggesting anyway, with certainly if you had the proportional representation system that Mathew is so fond of, that they would have a huge majority. So, or at least, a very strong minority administration. So, look, Keir Starmer is, I think, weirdly, despite the fact he can get sort of anything through Parliament, in quite a weak position. He doesn't seem to stand for very much. I still don't really know what he believes. I think a lot of people are in that position as well. And also with grooming gangs, for example, or rape gangs, as I prefer to call them, because I think we need to remember that children are being raped here. They're not being groomed, they're being raped. And it's still going on. And the cover-up is still going on. I spoke to a councillor in Portsmouth yesterday who was, not specifically in relation to those gangs, but someone who was charged and has been remanded in custody on an alleged incident, which I'll not talk about, but it's alleged rape. And that he was told as a councillor not to talk about it because it might inflame community tensions. That is ridiculous and outrageous. So we're in a situation where Keir Starmer he knew at some stage he would have to call a national inquiry into these gangs. That was inevitable. And he asked Louise Casey to do her report. Her report is, in some cases, jaw-dropping, but weirdly not surprising as well, because we know this has been a huge issue for a long time. Why didn't he just do it in the first place? And you've got to be really cynical and say, well, was he looking over his shoulder at people? Did he not want this did he not have the political capital in order to do this? And you have a prime minister who has, on paper, a lot of power, but almost everything that's happened this week, including some of the answers to my questions on Thursday, don't show him in a position where he's master of all he surveys. We also have the government doing lots of weird things, such as the abortion legislation and the assisted dying legislation, that they don't, I know they're private members' bills, but they're essentially supported by the government. They don't have to do that. They don't have to make that huge social change. And I find it really interesting that they're deciding to do so.
So can I ask on the staying with the grooming gangs issue, and I asked this very delicately, but I think it needs asking. At what point does genuine concern about what has happened, which is absolutely legitimate, cross over in a chance to be racist without any consequence?
Okay, well, if you say that all Muslims are rapists, that's racist and wrong and factually wrong. If you state facts which have been suppressed for a long time, and a lot of people have said you can't talk about this, or you can't say that the majority of those involved in rape gangs are Pakistani Muslim men. That is a factual point. The fact is that I would argue there was almost reverse racism in many of these situations, or a form of racism where people said, well, this is a young white girl. She is from a difficult background. Let's not believe her. And actually, we're putting this in the too difficult box because it's a culture that a person doesn't understand or doesn't want to get into or doesn't want to criticize. We're in a situation in this country where a lot of people, not everybody, but a lot of people feel they can't say things because they'll be that are factual because they'll be construed as racist. That's a really, really dangerous situation. And people have lost their jobs about this stuff. People have had promotions taken away from them. People have lost money. People have lost livelihoods because they have said certain things that are construed as racist, or they've been in that situation. Now, if you can't say something that is factual, that is a really big issue, specifically in regard to grooming gangs. It's a really tough one in many respects, and it's. But what I have learned over the last 4.5 years, and from my time in politics, but my last 4.5 years at Talk, is if you try to suppress things, if you try to tell people they can't talk about things, and there are people who will not be as articulate as the three of us on this podcast. There will be people who will not be able to express themselves as we do, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Stop listening to those people. Tell them they can't say things. Tell them they can't vent their frustration, and then you get riots. That's what happens. We need to have a grown-up conversation about this, and we need to have a factual conversation about this without going around calling people racists.
And what gets me as well is the people, especially people in the government, who are now saying, well, we wanted a national inquiry all along. At the time, saying that, oh, we didn't want a national inquiry, and insinuated people who did as being on the far right or jumping on the far right bandwagon as well. I mean, for goodness sake, I mean, just
well, I asked the Prime Minister about this specific point, and he said he was specifically talking about Conservative politicians like Kemi Badenoch and Chris Philp, of course, the Shadow Home Secretary, who in government, he said, did quote unquote nothing, and then were saying, oh, there's got to be a national inquiry, there's got to be a national inquiry. That's okay, I suppose, as far as it goes. My point in that is, well, you're still saying they're jumping on a right-wing bandwagon, even if they're specific people and you're saying it for a reason, they're jumping on why is it a right-wing bandwagon to say there should be a national inquiry, which is something you have now done, which if I had longer with the Prime Minister, I would have asked him, but I didn't. So the point in all of this, I suppose, is, there is going to be a national inquiry, but it's been dragged out of the Labour Party kicking and screaming. And I think it is sad that that's the case. And I think that the problem is that when U-turns occur, you can either stand up, as I think the Prime Minister should have done, and said, look, I got it wrong. I should have done this previously. I should have done this from the start. I should have listened to the evidence. I'm a lawyer. I failed to look at the evidence. Come with me and let's together get an answer to this and get better outcomes for the victims. And that would have taken a lot out of it.
Do you think we'll see more resignations from the government in regards to disability cuts?
Yes. Yeah.
And what do you think that'll mean politically? What do you think that'll mean for Keir Starmer?
Well, governing is really difficult. And if you run out of money, you need to find it from somewhere. And taxpayers are really, we're being taxed at the highest rate since the Second World War as a proportion of GDP. And the money, there has to be some sense of value for money. The problem with the disability benefits bill is that you have minister after minister, Conservative and Labour, Liberal Democrat as well, saying, oh, we're going to cut fraud. Well, that's part of it, but it's a very, very small part of it. You have a lot more people who are on benefits for lots of different reasons, including the COVID lockdowns, including mental health problems and all sorts of other issues, including the economic picture we have. The problem is that this government, and many governments, I'm not really being party political here, I'm not a member of the Conservative Party anymore, but I suppose my point is that so many people try to fix one bit of the system and say, right, well, we're going to fix benefits. Well, to fix benefits, you need to fix education, you need to fix work, you need to fix attitudes and thoughts in regard to work. Universal credit was a really good idea for me and Duncan Smith, and his legs were cut from under him politically by George Osborne. Usually, and I think on all of that, it goes back to my mantra, essentially, my sort of two mantras in politics. One is if there's a consensus, it's wrong. And secondly, most things are the fault of George Osborne or Tony Blair. But I think from Keir Starmer's perspective, yes, he's going to see resignations. It's going to be very difficult for the Labour Party. And a lot of people didn't go into politics to do this. And also, they don't owe him personal loyalty. Yes, they were perhaps brought in on his coattails, but at the same time, they're looking over their shoulder, sometimes at a very small majority, often at Reform UK, which is, some people call a right-wing party. Look at a lot of their policies. I mean, Kemi Badenoch said they're Corbynism with a union flag. I'm not sure I necessarily agree with that, but certainly a lot of their policies are very tax and spend policies. And Richard Tice, their deputy leader, said in a podcast recently with The Spectator, he said, don't label us left or right. We're neither of those things. We're a different brand of politics. Well, they're fighting an asymmetric battle on welfare with their own party, with their own people, and against Reform UK, which is trouncing them in the polls consistently.
Okay, I think in the interest of time, we need to move on. I'd like to actually talk about the Conservatives first of all, given that you say you're not the member now, but you were a Tory SPAD, and I mean, there hasn't been a lot going on this week with the Conservatives. I think Kemi Badenoch's response to the U-turn, to the National Inquiry U-turn, was very strong, very passionate. I like that. But is it a case of too little, too late, given that the Tories in yesterday's Ipsos poll is now polling at 15%, 15%?
I don't think she's made really any impression apart from a negative one. I think Robert Jenrick is a much better opposition politician, and I think if he were leader of the Conservative Party, they'd be doing better. The Conservative Party may not be in the space that I wanted it to be in. I mean, I wasn't ever. I was a member of the Conservative Party. I was never really a Conservative. I was a Brokenshirite and a Mayite, and then that era of politics is over, and won't come back anytime soon. But one person who's another very, very good opposition politician is Chris Philp, who I worked with as a minister. I was, really across his brief this week. I think he did far better in Prime Minister's questions against Angela Rayner than Kemi Badenoch has on any other occasion.
Is that Chris Philp, Liz Truss's Chief Secretary to the Treasury? That Chris
You always say this, don't you?
Do you think he had any say in the economic policy of Liz Truss?
He gave that mini budget 9.5 out of 10.
What was he going to say? He was going to say, do you know what, it was rubbish. I think this budget was dreadful. Look, Chris Philp is, I think, a very gifted politician. Being Chief Secretary of the Treasury under the Liz Truss period was a total disaster for the country, for the Conservative Party, for politics in general. Kwasi Kwarteng is the worst chancellor this country has ever had or ever will have. She was a total disaster. I mean, I was someone who I've worked with Rishi Sunak. I don't know if he called me a friend, but I know him quite well. And I knew him when he was local government minister. In fact, it was quite funny when I was sort of tipping him for the leadership. And someone said, oh, you weren't saying this when he was Chief Secretary of the Treasury, only when he was Chancellor. And I said, well, no, I was saying it when he was local government minister. About 5 minutes after I met him, I thought he should be leader of the Conservative Party. Look, he wasn't the world's best prime minister. He made a lot of mistakes. I criticised him for a lot of those at the time. But he outclassed Liz Truss and always did. I remember speaking to a former advisor to Liz Truss, someone who was her special advisor, who sat in her kitchen eating toast with avocado on it in the mornings, discussing the day ahead. And she said, I said, who do you think, Liz Truss or Rishi Sunak? She said, why are we having this discussion? It's clearly Rishi Sunak. I remember when I'm rubbish at predictions. I'm dreadful at predictions. I'm the sort of Professor Neil Ferguson of political predictions. I got everything wrong. But I remember saying when Liz Truss was elected, I said the Conservative Party is going to wake up in about a month and say, what have we done? And, they did. And
is this a situation with Badenoch now? Do you see her being replaced in the
I kind of weirdly feel sorry for her, Chris, to be honest. And you can't, as one of my friends said about Theresa May, you can't have a prime minister you feel sorry for. And I really do feel that she's just not very good. I don't think that she has the skills. I don't think she has the personality. I don't think she's personable. And she's not cutting through at all. And,
Chris is a big fan of hers, by the way.
Okay, well, we'll stay political frenemies at the end of it. But no, I don't see anything that she's done that I can point to that says, okay, there are people who go, right, I'm going to vote Conservative because of her. I think the base likes her. I think the party, obviously, they voted for her, the party members. but Robert Jenrick's video in the tube station where he was accosting people and saying they should pay their fines, that is the number one thing the Conservatives have done since the election. 15 million views, and okay, there'll be some people watching it saying, "Oh, isn't he an idiot?" But people will have been convinced by that. I think Jenrick, Chris Philp, there are a couple of others to a degree. Vicky Atkins, who did quite a lot on the inheritance stuff with her Union Jack jacket, good for her. But a lot of the Conservatives, Ed Argar is a friend of mine. I really like Ed. He's a really good guy. I've heard virtually nothing from him over the last few months, and he's the Shadow Health Secretary. You can walk down that street outside my house and ask, 100 people, tell me something Kemi Badenoch's done, and I'm not sure they could tell you.
I should correct the records. Just go on, Matthew, but I'll correct the records.
I was just going to say, Ed Argar is an MP up here, of course, Leicestershire MP.
He's a good guy. He's a really good guy.
Yeah.
I don't think he's done basically nothing as health secretary, as Shadow Health Secretary.
Yeah, and I briefly met him because I briefly worked for Michael Ancram for about 2 minutes, and he was there then, and yeah, from the brief time that I met him, he's a good guy as well. My opinion on Badenoch was that I thought she did a really good conference speech. I thought she had potential, but I didn't know that much about her because she wasn't a massively high profile figure, and like you, I'm massively disappointed by her, ever since she became leader. So I'm not this great big fanatic.
Oh, come on, Chris. You told me that she was like a wonderful communicator. Well, I'm yet to see it, and you did say this. Oh, you see, this is what we get into. Now we've got a few minutes left with Peter, and still 2 more parties to go. So shall we get on to Reform UK's week? I don't think it's been an especially busy week for them, but they continue to make headlines. I do want to ask you, Chris, obviously you are, I guess now, a former colleague of David Bull, the new Reform UK chair, and I met him a couple of times when I was waiting to come on your show. And although, again, I'd obviously disagree with him on pretty much everything, I always thought that he's a very kind of warm character in the way that the former Reform chair, in truth, really isn't necessarily. Do you agree with that? And how do you think he'll do as Reform chair?
Well, it's very different to Zia Youssef. I've met Zia Youssef. I've interviewed him a few times. He's always been very personable with me, but certainly David is a very warm person. He was he's a children's TV presenter previously. He has that kind of energy and Tiggerish kind of charm. And, he is someone who a lot of people in Reform know. He's been around for a long time with that party, with their previous incarnations. He was an MEP for the Brexit Party, for example. He's someone who I think really can communicate very, very well. Reform UK clearly had a problem when Zia Youssef left, but now he's back after his sort of 48 hours of not being involved. And David, I think, will do very well. For Reform UK, they'll be delighted with the Ipsos poll putting them at 34%. And also, Nigel Farage did a big interview with Talk this week, and an even more important interview, which is for my forthcoming book, Political Animals, where he said that if he becomes Prime Minister, Larry's going nowhere.
Oh, we love Larry. And I'm actually serious about this. I am wanting exclusive Larry comments. If that doesn't happen,
well, I've tried to interview him, but he keeps his counsel, it must be said.
He was almost run over this week, bless him.
Well, interestingly, you should mention that I have a little exclusive for Political Frenemies, which is that I asked Keir Starmer about this particular thing. In fact, I can find you the exact words if you just bear with me for 1 second from the transcript. And I asked him about this, and of course he was in Canada at the G7 and was unaware that Angela Rayner's ministerial car, she wasn't driving it, but her ministerial car almost ran over Larry. So he said, Angela had a close encounter. I was at the G7 in Canada, and Angela actually sent me the clip with a message saying, all under control here, boss. So that is what Starmer told me. That is not in the public domain previously, so that is a Political Frenemies exclusive.
Oh, we love that, don't we, Chris?
Yeah. No, yeah, and I said on the pre-show I'm a big fan of cats as well. So
excellent. Well, you'll definitely like my book Political Animals, which is out on the 16th of September.
Yeah. And yeah, we'll definitely promote that when the time comes. I think we better, because we need to wrap up quite quickly. I think we better just move on to the Lib Dems. I'll leave this to Mathew, because obviously it's Matthew's party.
No.
So
well, now Chris always has this. So Chris, bless him, we'll let our viewers and listeners into this. He, bless his heart, prepares a little brief for us each week. It keeps him busy, when he's got nothing else to do. And under Lib Dems week, he almost always puts a question mark, right? As if to say,
they did have a week. The Liberal Democrats did exist in the last period.
They had a week. I said this on I think on last week's pod, that I do get frustrated with my party, and Peter knows that I'm not just a robot for the Lib Dems. I do criticise them, and I think they need to criticise it. And I do worry that just not much is happening. Just not really much is particularly is being said. And, Ed Davey doesn't do set piece speeches or anything.
Well, Daisy Cooper, I think, didn't really make much of an impression at Prime Minister's Questions this week. The one story that I've told Mathew before, but I'll tell you on this podcast is, it's rare that I am a huge fan of Lib Dem policy. And the Liberal Democrats came out with a policy about a week before the council elections, where they said that if you played your music out of your mobile phone on public transport, that, it's one of the most obnoxious, annoying things I find. I use public transport almost every day, and, people playing music or playing games or having phone calls on sort of, video calls or whatever. It's really obnoxious. Just, you can afford a couple of £100 for a phone. You can afford $5.99 for a pair of headphones. Just put them in and stop being an idiot. And the Liberal Democrats said they would fine people up to £1,000. I thought this was a really good idea, really good policy. And I rang my producers rang the Liberal Democrat press office twice and said, give us literally any of your 72 MPs, put them on my show, and I will say, this is a really good idea, tell us more about it, and do a general interview about the council elections. And that was going to be what in journalism terms we call a free hit. For those people, because I agreed with them and we're an opinion station. My opinion was this was a really good policy. I then rang the Liberal Democrat press office myself and said, look, I'm the presenter here. I don't usually do this, but I'm telling you, give me literally any one of the 72 MPs in a couple of hours' time, put them on my show on a Zoom from anywhere they are, and I will ask them about this policy, which is very straightforward. They're not going to take a load of briefing for it necessarily. It's not complex. I'm not asking them about social policy or welfare change or something like that. Put them on a week before the council elections and we'll do this. They don't get back to us. And you're just like, you're idiots. I'm sorry. This is so straightforward. You've got a hostile state or relatively hostile station. You might convince a few people to vote for you in council elections in a week's time. They should have been scrambling. They should have been saying, right, we have identified 5 young up-and-coming MPs for the Liberal Democrats. They're really good media performers. We want to train them up. This is an opportunity where you're going to have a reasonable interview. You're going to persuade a few people to vote Lib Dem. Put them on Peter's show. Didn't happen. And, there are some Lib Dems who are very good, who will talk to us. Carl Cashman, for example, you, Mathew, as well. I know you're a big fan of Carl Cashman, entirely for his political views. And also the MP for Sutton and Cheam as well. I can't remember his name, but he's an aeronautical engineer and came on and talked about the Air India flight and what happened there, that horrendous tragedy. He was a great talker. He came on, but that was us going to him directly. So Lib Dems, sort it out, start talking a bit louder, because you're going to have problems if you don't communicate.
And I agree. And I've heard this as well when and it kind of bit me on the bum, really, because I was really having to go at Sky News one day for not having Lib Dems on Twitter. One of their producers came back. I mean, whether he should have done this, I suppose it doesn't matter. But he came back and said, "We've tried to get them on. They don't come on."
I mean, it is one of the great frustrations of being a producer. I've done it. I was a political booker on Newsnight, on Question Time, and other programs as well. Is when you invite politicians on, they say no, and you don't know why. You can understand sometimes, okay, you don't want to do an interview, it'll be hostile, it's a presenter you don't like, your policy's been rubbished over the course of the day or whatever. But sometimes you just think, come on, guys, this is really straightforward. And had I been in the Lib Dem press office, I've done political communications, it would have been right straight in there. Let's do this. I should say the MP for Sutton and Cheam is called Luke Taylor. I just looked it up.
Oh, okay. Just on that, and perhaps finally, when I was on your show just this past couple of weeks ago, you had Mike Tapp on,
Yep.
Labour MP, and I got the chance to meet him, and I just find him a really intriguing figure in the Labour Party. He came on. Chris is chuckling. He came on your show, but I was interested because he's been really quite critical of other presenters on Talk. So I wonder if he'll only do certain shows on Talk now.
I really don't want to get into that if you don't mind. Matthew,
no, that's fine.
I didn't answer you, but just I can talk about basically anything, but contractually, I'm not really supposed to talk about sort of internal Talk stuff. All I would say on that is I'm delighted Mike Tapp has come on our station. He comes on my program about once a month, and he always gives full and frank answers. And look, I challenge him robustly as I do with any other MP.
Well, Peter, thanks so much for coming on and giving us so much of your time. We really appreciate it. Sure. I said to Chris that I knew you'd be absolutely fab on the pod, and you really have been. So thanks so much, Peter.
It's very kind. Thank you. Good to meet you, Chris, as well. And perhaps we'll get both of you on my show soon.
That'll be fab.
Thanks very much. And we covered so much as well in such a short space of time. It's really been a treat. Thanks very much for giving up your time for the podcast. We're very grateful. And as I said, we'll put the link to your Special Advisors book in the description. And if you haven't read it, do buy it and read it, because it's a really good read.
Thank you.
And folks, please do all the internety things. Please like, please subscribe, please find Peter. Where can people find you, Peter, online?
Follow me on Twitter at Peter Cardwell.
Awesome. And I guess we'll see folks next week, Chris.
Yeah. Next week's going to be another busy week as well. We've got the NATO summit coming up, so we'll probably discuss that. But until then, thanks very much to Peter again. I hope you have a good week, and we'll see you on the next episode of Political Frenemies.